Welcome, Karen Gilbert. You are an entrepreneur perfumier last time I heard, but you might have changed what you're doing since then, and you certainly did things before. So, what I'd love to is to go right back to the very beginning and tell us all about you, how you got started, how you realized you were an entrepreneurial spirit, and what you did and the steps you took to get to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was saying before we went live, Nicola, it's been a very, very long time. I think we met probably back in probably 2008, 2009.
That late, you
Uh,
think? I seem to remember you coming to the hotel, but perhaps not.
yeah, maybe it was earlier than
Mm,
that.
2006.
No, actually, no, I didn't ever come to your hotel.
Oh,
No,
okay, okay.
it was in Southwark, I think. It was the Southwark
Oh,
Bridge
yes, yes.
Hotel. And yeah, so if I go back to that point, I had a retail business at the time and I was looking for, I don't know, I think I was looking for answers. It was going really badly at the time. And that's when I found you with the Money Gym. And that was before kind of Facebook and all of those things, I think probably.
Let's go before we talk about that. Let's go back. Let's go to Karen, the young child.
Back to the deepest, darkest past of, yeah, okay. Well, I started my very first business, I think in 2001. And before that, I'd had a couple of career, I suppose, stints. One in the fragrance industry, working as an evaluator for a big fragrance company called International Flavors and Fragrances. And I did that for 5 years and I fell into that completely by accident. And I'll come back to before that in a moment. And then I did another 5 year stint. I think it was 5 years anyway, for Neal's Yard in product development, for those of you who listening who don't know, Neal's Yard was at the time was like a pioneer in the natural and organic essential oils and skincare industry. And now it's a much bigger company. It was still a very small independent at the time. So I had like in my life, I suppose, like 10 years worth of being employed by other people. And before that, I think it was something that I'd always really had in my mind, that I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew that I didn't want to, have a regular job. And I don't know whether at that time I thought it was really possible. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what kind of business I wanted to run. All I think I knew is that I wanted to be free and I wanted to be independent and I didn't want anyone telling me what to do. And I actually found a essay that I wrote when I was probably about, I don't know how old I was. I think it was probably like 14, 15, something like that. And it was around, what do you want to do when you grow up, or when you're 30, or whatever it was. It was something like that. In that, I said that I wanted to either have my own business or be a manager of some description, which I think is kind of hilarious now because managing people is just like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was reading that, and I think I screenshotted it a few years back when I found it, and I think at that time I still had, and I think mindset is a really massively important thing, and really understanding that a lot of personal development work, and I think that's really, it shapes who we become, the voices of those people around us. And sometimes it takes a lot of personal development work to unpick those things. And in this particular essay, it was like, I'd really like to have my own business one day, but, I know that I need to get my exams and my qualifications first so that I've got something to fall back on, because it's really hard to run a business and, you need a lot of capital to run a business. And I'm like, at 14, 15, like, where did those words come from? And they obviously came from teachers, grandparents, parents, things like that. And so I know that I had that real kind of like drive to do my own thing from quite a young age. But I also had this thing in my head that I need to actually, have an education, really understand what it is I want to do and have the backup before I go into it. And I think that is probably why I started my first business so late, much later in life than I feel like I probably should have done. So the first one was sort of, I dipped my toe in 2000. was it 2001? So I was 31 then.
Wow.
But actually, when I left school, I did my A levels and didn't know what I wanted to do, and decided that I would just go to work and get a job, just to give myself a year out, 2 years out. And I went to work for an advertising agency in Covent Garden, which is where I think I kind of fell in love with Neal's Yard, actually. And I lasted at that job for 4 months, hated it. Hated the whole 9 to 5, which was sometimes in that industry, it was like 9 till 11 or
Yeah,
7 or
whatever it took, yes.
yeah, whatever it took. And then it was actually for an ad agency that did brochures for Ford New Holland farming equipment. So really glamorous, and had to go on shoots on farms and things like that. And then there were two photographers there that said, well, look, if you're looking to leave, we're looking for an assistant and we work like in the same office. So, if you want to come and work for us and train to be a photographer's assistant, because I'd done photography at sixth form. And I was like, oh my God, yeah. So I was going to go and work for them. And they said, well, the only catch is that, we don't want to pay your tax and national insurance. So you need to be self-employed. So actually, that was probably at the age of, I think I was about 19 then. And so, yeah, it was 1989. So officially, the first time I became self-employed was again by accident. And that was at the age of 19, where I had to do my own bookkeeping and pay my own tax and national insurance and what have you. So really that was the first time. But technically, it wasn't like working for myself or running a business, because I still had to turn up at work at a certain time and leave at a certain time. But the only difference was, I had to take responsibility for my own financial stuff. Yeah. So I guess it's always been there. And then I ended up leaving there. Didn't really last very long there because it was a grim job in a grim, cold office. And I then ended up going to work for a temp agency, which was working on promotion teams in the skincare and beauty and fragrance industry. So we did launches for Harrods, Harvey Nichols, Selfridges, for a company called Shiseido, which was a Japanese skincare company that had come over and was launching in the UK. And so even though I wasn't technically working for myself or self-employed, I could actually say, no, I don't want to work today. And they said to me, because it was an agency job, they were like, okay, well, we did a 2 week stint. I'd be working 7 days a week for 2 weeks on promotion, but then I might not work for, the next week. And then we did kind of counter cover. So it would be like, okay, what's your availability this week? And I would say, okay, I was living at home. So it was actually quite fine to do that. My family were very accommodating. And I'd be like, okay, well, I can work Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever. And I would do that. So technically, even then, I was kind of working on a sort of a freelance scale. And then when I went to London College of Fashion, trained as a makeup artist. And that is when I did a work placement for IFF and fell into the fragrance industry. And I got offered a job by IFF, and then that turned into like a full-time sort of career job. And over that 5 years, I mean, I learned a lot. And, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I kind of learned about the industry. But I really struggled. Honestly, I struggled with that whole 9 to 5.
Oh, yeah. It felt like a prison, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I think that really kept me going with it was that they gave me quite a big degree of flexibility in my role, in that I had my own office and I managed the little lab. So I didn't work in a big kind of like group office. My boss kind of left me alone to do my
Yeah.
job, didn't micromanage me. Also, I had to kind of schedule in sample shopping. So we had to go buy all of the samples from Tesco and Superdrug, and send them off to the creative centres. And so I could do that on my way into work in the morning if that fit my schedule. So often I would do that. And if I had like a week where I had a lot of sample shopping to do, I knew that one day, okay, I could say to my boss, look, I'm going to do that first on my way to work. And then I'll come in after that. And she was absolutely cool with that. And it just felt like it was much more flexible. And then when I left and went to Neal's Yard, I negotiated my hours so that I didn't have to. So I did 10 till 6 rather than 9 till 5 so that I could miss rush hour because
Yeah.
I hated doing that commute and like being squashed on the tube. And so I always negotiated with those sorts of things. And then I think with Neal's Yard, I left 3 times or 4 times. And every time I left and they asked me to come back, I renegotiated my hours. So I was actually doing less and less and less. And then I started my own business in 2003 properly. That's when I started Time Bomb, the retail business. And so at the time I was running that business and my partner at the time was sort of doing the shop floor stuff and I was still working for Neal's Yard. And then I gradually dropped my hours and then I left it eventually completely and went into the business full time. And that was probably 2004. So
Okay.
yeah, it was like it was dipping my toe in and out and then back in. But I think I always had that in me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I worked for a guy called Benny Gray who ran the space organization. And it was Alfie's Antiques, Gray's Antiques, Canalot Production Studios, Big Peg in Birmingham, lots of creative centres with lots
Mm.
of people working in them. And I absolutely loved the whole creative thing. But he was brilliant because he never, as you said, he never micromanaged me. He never, if I got in 5 minutes late, it wasn't a big deal, or 10 minutes early, or even I used to work evenings sometimes if needed, and then I'd have a day off, and as long as the job got done and I kept moving forward. And he used to have this amazing system where you'd send him an email on Friday afternoon and it was what worked, what didn't, and what's changing. And I still use that to keep myself on track now. But if bosses realised how much more they got out of entrepreneurial types and how little we need to keep us happy in terms of not feeling like you're in a prison or you're constrained by having to be there at a certain time or having to travel at a certain time, and just the stuff that makes entrepreneurs feel like they're in prison. They'd
Yeah,
get
and I think that was one of the things that with Neal's Yard is that I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I ended up working 3 days a week for Neal's Yard. That was when I'd sidestepped from product development and I was then their retail trainer. I sort of was in the training department and I ended up doing the same amount of work and volume. I basically was doing the same job that I was doing in 5 days a week in
wow.
3 days a week, except I was only getting 3 days pay.
Oh, yeah, that's the
So
problem, isn't
yeah,
it?
exactly. And so I think that I don't know whether that's changed now in terms of if with the whole work from home thing, and I don't know whether it's gone back to that. But I did find that, I still did the same amount of work. And I do think that if employers paid their staff not, I don't know, like if
Got
you
to be
can
on
do the
outcome,
job.
isn't it? You've got to find. With Benny, it was great because the first project I did for him, it was measurable outcome. Second project, measurable outcome. Third project was all about making money out of an empty room in Mayfair, and probably you did some perfume launches there because it was the music room above Gray's Antiques, and that's one of the things we used to do up there was let it out for 3 days, 5 days,
Yeah.
launches, that sort of stuff, and it was all based on how much money I made him out of that empty room. And as long as that amount kept going up and there was a good profit margin in it, he didn't care what the other details were. So I suppose that's what one's got to do with an employer is work out what the measurable outcome of your role is. And
Yeah.
then perhaps if you're meeting that measurable outcome, it shouldn't really matter which days you're working.
No, and I do think, I mean, obviously there are some um you know, differences in different industries. I had a retail business. So obviously people needed to I had to
Yes, you
have
need
bodies
someone in
on
the
the
shop.
floor,
Yeah.
at that point somebody to manage the shop, man the shop. But in the business that I have now, I don't have, I mean, I've got very small team, but they're all freelancers. They're not employees in the sense that they have to show up to work every day at a certain time. And so I chose to employ freelancers because one, I think managing a team of God knows how many staff we had over the years at Time Bomb, but managing a team of very young staff and it just wasn't my skill set. Honestly, managing people is so not my skill set. And so I actually prefer entrepreneurial types who come in and do the job. And I kind of, when I had the retail business, I did try that a little bit. I had one guy who left actually because he wanted to start his own business. And I was like, do you know what? That's an amazing idea. More than happy for you to do that. If you want to work part-time for us and do that on your, do that in your own time, in your
Yeah,
other
yeah.
hours. And I kind of treated a lot of my staff like they were entrepreneurs and gave them ownership of their role. But actually, some people just don't want that. And I think that was a
No,
big
many people
learning for
don't
me in
want it.
business
Yeah.
that not everyone is entrepreneurial and
No.
you can't foist or force entrepreneurialism on people who literally just want to rock up to work, get paid, go home and do whatever it
And
is they
not
want to
have to
do.
think too much. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I had a couple of people who were very entrepreneurial, and I had people who I would have preferred to be a bit more entrepreneurial, who weren't. And I think that was an interesting lesson that, yeah, we're a very different breed of people, entrepreneurs, I
We are.
think.
We're very nosy and curious, and we want to find out how everything works, and we want to know how everybody else's business works. Everyone's always groaning at me when I go on holiday. Someone was asking people like the taxi driver or the boat excursion chap or whatever, how their business works. So anyway, back to you. So I remember you in the retail place. It was in Croydon, wasn't it?
Yeah, it
And
was.
and so that went along for a while, but then you joined the Money Gym when it wasn't going quite so well. Money Gym ran from 2000 to 2010. So that's
Yeah.
around the middle to end of that, just as we're all going into a global financial crisis, but nobody realized that.
Yeah. So I realized it very
Did you? Was it, did the,
yeah, I realized it when people stopped
yeah.
spending money. So I started the retail business in 2003, at the end of 2003, and I started that on a bit of a whim, actually. It was a bit of a conversation over a couple of beers in a bar with my now ex-partner. And he was in the music industry, he was in bands and what have you, and had a record deal, then lost the record deal. And we were kind of sitting there thinking, okay, well, I was working at Neal's Yard. Sorry, yeah, I was working at Neal's Yard at the time, and he just wasn't really doing anything. And he had lived in Camden, and we were just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to open a shop like one of the shops in Camden, but in Croydon? Because there were loads of little kind of rocker kids and metalers and goth kids around with nowhere to go. And so I just thought, oh, well, I'll have a look and see what's out there in terms of property, premises. And I found, this little area that was super cheap as chips rent. And I was like, okay, it's not going to take much, but I've got a job. So you'll have to be the face of it. I'll fund it. And we'll just get it up and
Make it a
running.
sort
And
of
that, I think,
destination experience kind of thing.
yeah. And so that was in the July, I think. We had the idea of the July of 2003. And then by Christmas that year, the shop was open.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything about running I mean, I thought, well, I've worked in retail my entire life, but I didn't know anything about running a retail store other than I'd worked in retail. So I kind of knew enough, but I'd never had a clothing business. So I had no idea about any of that. So it was literally learning on the job and just hustling it. And there was no Facebook. I think MySpace was just starting then as well. So there
Okay.
was a little bit of that, but we had no social media. It was literally printing flyers out and pounding the streets and putting posters up, putting flyers in pubs, in other shops, in bars, handing them out in the street at gigs, that kind of thing. And we ran that kind of went really, really well. And it ended up going so well, we had to move premises. So we moved to a bigger premises. And then we were in this bigger premises until about 2007. And then we got an eviction notice to say, oh, we're redeveloping this block and you've got to move. And at that point in 2007, we'd had a lot of growth, but I'd actually funded a lot of the growth on credit cards at naught, we had our 0% credit cards, personal loans, that kind of thing. And so I'd got to that point in 2007 where I think the business had a debt of quite a chunk, and I'm not quite sure how much it was in 2007, but by the time I found the money gym, it was about 85,000, and that was
What
when,
business owes you 85,000?
yeah, and that was all on my personal credit cards.
Oh, ouch.
I know. And then we had to move. So our landlord said, well, look, I had to, all of this debt, and I had this business, and we were looking to having to move. And I'm like, I can't shut this business down, because if I shut the business down, how am I going to pay off the debt? So
Yeah.
we were forced to move to a different premise again, which was much, much bigger, too big for us, really. The rent was double.
Oh,
But it was on a high street location. So I had nearly had a nervous breakdown. So I had to do it. And I was just like, what do we do? What do we do? Okay, I'm just going to have to do it. And then the recession hit, and all of the credit card companies put the interest, the 0% went up to 30 something percent,
oh no, it's horrendous. Yeah.
25, 30%. So I was paying the minimum amount every month on these credit cards, which was about 85 grand's worth of debt at
Oh,
like
God.
25, 30%. And the recession hit, Primark opened down the road. No one was buying any clothing. And our sales were like, we were losing 25 grand a year,
Oh,
like
ouch.
basically. And that's when I found the money gym. And I think I'd Googled, I don't know what I'd even Googled. And it was actually through, God, what's his name? Andy, who, the property guy.
Andy Shaw.
Andy should, yeah. So I found, for whatever reason, I was thinking, oh, maybe I should look at something else, property investing, online business, or something like that. And I
Mm,
think I'd Googled something to do with online business or property, and I ended up buying his book. And then I think I found you, and it was through something to do with online business, because we'd never what we'd never managed to do is get our online shop up and running
right.
for the retail business. And so in my head, I was like, okay, we need to be leveraging like out our time, and also getting outside of our local area, which has got a very small pool. We can't compete with some of these big online brands. So why don't we try and get our own online thing up and running? And I think that's how I found you,
I think
actually.
you were custom printing t-shirts and things, weren't
Yeah.
you?
So we were also, we'd started printing t-shirts, actually, because we couldn't afford to buy stock.
Okay.
So a lot of the design kind of led alternative clothing brands were really expensive, and the kids couldn't afford them. And so they were coming in saying, oh, we want something that looks a bit like that, but we can't afford to pay 30 quid for a t-shirt. Have you got anything cheaper? And we couldn't find anything cheaper. And so what we started doing was doing custom designs, custom printing. And obviously that was it became a huge part of our business, actually, and it was one of the things that turned the business around.
Wow.
That was one of the things. And then when we had the bigger premises, it was like, obviously we had to employ more staff, and that we couldn't really afford. And I think I was just sort of like clutching at straws, trying to kind of decide what to do. And a lot of people would come into the shop and say, oh, do you do body piercing? Do you do tattoos? Because it was kind of that
Yeah.
vibe of a shop. And I was just like, that is not my area. I don't know anything about that industry particularly. No, we don't. But we actually do sell body jewelry. So people were coming in to buy their like nose rings, lip rings, whatever. And I'm just like, do you know what? We've got the space,
Yeah.
so maybe we should turn a little bit of the space. We had this kitchen area downstairs and a big kind of warehouse area. And so what we decided to do is turn the little kitchen area into a piercing studio. And so I found out all of the ins and outs of what we needed to set it up. And then a guy who came into the shop was like, oh, I know how to do this. He was much older guy. And he gave us some advice, which turned out to be like awful. But anyway, long and short of it is we opened this body piercing studio. And initially I'd offered the spot to one of our a studio in the local area. And I said, look, do you want to come in and take this as
A
a
second.
unit, take it not as a franchise, but I can't remember, what the name of it is. Like, take it as a concession. That's it. Would
Yes.
you like to take this as a concession? And they said no. And I'm like, okay, we've got to do it ourselves. Anyway, we did. And we employed this guy. And it was like, okay, but it was like he was quite slow. And I'm like, how are we going to make any money doing this? And then a couple of things happened and he made a couple of mistakes. And I'm like, actually, we can't afford for anyone in this type of business to make any mistakes.
No, quite,
So
yeah.
we fired him and put an ad on a community tattoo community forum. And this guy, this young Aussie guy who was 21, answered, came in, and he was just like, I've just arrived. I've got a 2-year visa. This is what I do. This is what I've done my entire life. I've been working in studios since I was 15. And we're like, okay, you're hired. Come in. He said, I can see what's going wrong. This is how you need to do it. And he literally just stepped in the next week, took the studio over. Like we pay, he was like, I just want a salary. I don't want commission. I need a salary because I need to pay my rent. And yeah, he looked really cool. He was great with customers. And he literally just took it and ran with it. And he said, we need to open a tattoo studio with the rest of the space. And I'm like, hang on, hold your horses, like one bit at a time. And I said, you turn this into a profitable studio, and then we'll see what we can do. And that year that he joined the business, we went from making a 25 grand loss to a small profit
Wow. Okay.
within about 3 or 4 months.
That's incredible. The right people at the right time. And
It was just
incredible.
honestly like Doug saved that business,
Right.
really, honestly. And so that happened. And then he was like, okay, so when can we do the tattoo studio? And I was like, okay, so we're making a profit. That's all great.
Were you starting
How
to
do
pay
we?
yourself back a tiny bit by then or not?
No, not at
Not
all.
yet.
I was taking a salary. I was taking the minimum salary for that entire time of like, I don't know, 7.5 grand a year, I think, whatever it was. So literally that's all I was taking. And I was paying my then partner a bit more than that. But between the two of us, we were on minimum wage, but it was just enough because I
Yeah.
had a house that we lived in and my mortgage was really low. So we kind of just kept the wall from the door from that perspective. And then I was like, okay, so I've got 10 more £1,000 on my credit card. That is literally it. And I know that we're making a profit now, but I'm pretty virtually bankrupt in terms of like, I don't know, I'm still like paying the
You've
minimum.
got no assets, you've got no income to speak.
Yeah. And I'm just like, I'm not losing the house. And I remember when I came to the first session at the Money Gym, I had a coaching session with Judith, and I never ever forget this. And I always say, it was the best piece of advice that I ever ignored from Judith.
Oh
And
dear.
yeah, no, it was, she said, because I, cried for the entire 30 minutes saying how terrible my business was, yada, yada. And she was just like, look, nothing is worth this. And why don't you just declare yourself bankrupt, get rid of that business, do something else, etc. And I was so stubborn. And I was like, I'm not losing my house. I'm not doing this. I'm not declaring myself bankrupt. And I clung on tooth and nail. And I was just like, actually, I've got £10,000 more. If I'm going to go down for 85 grand, I'll go down. I can just as easy go down for 95.
Yeah.
So I've said to Doug, like, I've got 10 grand. That's it. Like, if you can pull in favors, if you can set up the rest of the downstairs basement into a tattoo studio, if you can do it for 10 grand and kit it out, then we can do it. And he was like, okay, right, I'll see what I can do. And I literally just gave him the brief and was like, that's it. And at that same time, that was probably, I think that was 2010, actually. I think that might have been
It was about to
2010.
collapse. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think that was about 2010. And I'd gone away with my then partner, and I was like, I needed to take, and I think actually the Money Gym, really, those sessions that you used to do at the hotel, I'd started to carve out. And I think I met Philly um um at Judith's wake the other day, and she was my Money Gym coach.
Oh,
And I realized we hadn't actually met in real life ever. And that was from back in 2009, whatever. And I'd decided when I started working with the Money Gym to like carve out small pockets of time for myself. And I think this is so important for anyone who's starting a business, who's in a business. And I think it was at the time, it was like those coaching sessions were like, okay, I'm going to take an afternoon a month or whatever it was. And then when you did the live things, I'm going to go to one of those and carve out that time for myself. And gradually, I carved out more and more time for myself. And I think I was away on holiday and I was just like, okay, I need to sort of decide what it is that I'm going to do. And I think it was it was a session that, because Judith set up a little the creation experiment
Yeah.
a group circle, and I was part of that. And it was through some of those sessions that I was just like, okay, what is it I can do? And I think one of the things that we always find, if you're in a business for so long and you're in it, you don't see the wood for the trees, and you
No,
can't
you
like,
definitely don't.
it's
Yeah.
like you can't make strategic decisions when you are in the mud of it and in the weeds of it. And I think by carving out those little pockets of time to have coaching sessions, to have go to events, I actually started to think a lot more clearly. And also, it helped me to let go of the reins and micromanage everyone and give people a bit of
We were
responsibility.
very keen on the E-Myth way of doing
The
things.
E-Myth, yeah. And I read that book, like that E-Myth book was, that was, yeah. So that was where I got it from you
Mind-blowing for any
guys.
entrepreneur.
And it was like, okay. And obviously Judith ran cash flow. I think you, the Money Gym run cash flow sessions as
Yeah,
well. That's
we did.
probably where,
We cash flow 101 games. Judith was very, very. I mean, we're all sort of hurting a bit because she has only been gone about a month, and she was so brilliant about working with creative people. She had.
yeah,
I mean, I was a creative person because I went to art college and did fashion and all that stuff, but I hadn't ever made any money at it. So I
yeah.
was a bit, a bit cynical about, trying to be creative. I was much more on the, do something to make money and then be creative on the side. But
Yeah.
Judith really believed in creativity being a route to abundance, and
Yeah,
she was
absolutely.
very good on time, taking care of yourself. She was very good about taking time out to strategically plan. And she was just an amazing person. She had certain, I know that you work with very closely with her, and
Yeah, I mean, she was a close friend
God,
from the entire that session at the Money Gym where I bawled my eyes out
yeah.
until, you know,
She used to she used to vet everybody coming into the Money Gym. She wouldn't let anyone in without her talking to her first. Whereas I would have, I would have largely taken anyone who had the right attitude and the money to pay us. But
yeah,
she really believed in finding out the deep depths of someone's soul and working from
yeah.
there. And it's so amazing to hear you talking about the power of coaching, because it's completely changed my life, and so many people don't give it the respect it deserves, I don't think.
I think the reason that I place such a big value on it over the course of my life is that I think it was because of the retail business actually. And I found myself in a position where I had a team of staff, youngish staff who were all in their late teens, early 20s. And I was in my early 30s, mid 30s. And then my partner at the time was the same age as me, and he had never run a business before. He was a bit of a hustler and a busker, and he could wing it, but not a good manager of people or anything. And I felt such a heavy weight on my shoulders
Yeah.
because I was the person that they all came to for problems, issues to solve, dilemmas. And I was just like, where do people go? Like when you're at the top of this tree, like what do you do? I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing. Who do I go to? And I'd had sessions with various experts. You go to your local chamber of commerce or whatever,
Oh
and
God,
and
yes.
then you get a free coaching session. And honestly, like I was just like, these people just don't have a clue about me or what it just didn't work. And when I met Judith and really started to come to the events at the Money Gym, it just opened up a whole world
Whole
to
room full
me.
of people just like you.
Yeah, and that I didn't even
Everybody
know
trying to
existed.
improve themselves.
Yeah, and that was hugely groundbreaking. And I think so by the time 2010 came around, I'd started to carve out chunks of time for myself. And because I was going to these monthly things, this creation experiment things, and having sessions there, and that was like, I remember Judith saying to me, like, enough, Karen. And it actually was it really hurt at the time, because she said, look, you've been, we both know her very, very well.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I'm going to butcher her imagine this in a Judith voice. It's like, look, I'm just like, this has got to a point now where you've just got to stop complaining about this. You've either basically, and she said it in no uncertain terms, shit or get off the pot.
And she was so posh too, wasn't she? So when
She was incredibly
like
posh.
that, it was
And I was just, and
top.
I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she's like, you've just been whining about this for like
Years
however many
now.
years. What was it, from 2007 to like 3 years or something? Like, just, you've got to make a change and you've got to do something about it, or you need to just stop complaining about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so it was actually, I think it was Bianca Tate, actually. It was Bianca who,
Bianca, yes.
yeah, who said, okay, right, take me through a little coaching thing. And it was like, okay, when was a time that you were really happy doing something in your career, in a job, whatever? Because I was like, I don't know what I can do. And she actually kind of reminded me of a time when I was running workshops when I was at Neal's Yard with kids or teenagers, making product. And I'm like, that was really fun. And she was like, okay, well, why don't you just go and do that for just, it doesn't have to be your life, but just do something that is not your business. Do
Yeah.
something that is actually enjoyable. And I was like, okay, yeah. And that set me off on a little trajectory. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to write a book. I'm going to and I delved into my, the sort of depths of my brain of what I used to do. And okay, I'm going to, teach them natural beauty product making classes. I'm going to talk about perfume and aromatherapy and natural materials, and that, because that was what I was really interested in. And the timeline of this is so kind of collapsed and interwoven. I don't even know what the trajectory was, but all I know is that I went to I was in Thailand and I made a video, and this video is still up on one of my old YouTube channels,
Uh-huh.
from Chiang Mai in Thailand, saying, when I get back, I'm going to start teaching workshops. And I keep it there just for my own. It's
Just
not on the
set
channel that
your
I use.
intention, yeah.
Yeah. And so I decided to do that. And then and actually, yes, I was on Twitter. I was definitely on Twitter because my friend who was teaching sewing at the time, had a friend who was living with me at the time, I think. She was teaching sewing classes. And she said, oh, there's this organization they've set up, and every sewing class that I put out, they kind of do a similar thing, and will you just follow them and see what they're doing, keep an eye on them? And I did. And I saw a tweet that said, oh, we're looking for an instructor for a class on teaching body product making class, like bath bombs
Okay.
and things like that. And I was like, oh
That's
God,
me.
will
That's
Libby be
me.
annoyed if yeah. So I messaged them. I was like, I can do that. And it was in Islington. It was a company called the Make Lounge. Jennifer Purtle. She was just so instrumental in helping me to achieve what I've achieved now. Is that she had an interview. She was like, brilliant. Okay, can you rewrite the class so that we've got this class. Our instructor has left. Can you rewrite it so that it's in your own, in your own flow? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll pull it apart. I'll redo it so that it's something that I can authentically teach and what have you. And that was that. And they paid,
So
I didn't get
was
paid
this a
very much
real
money.
life thing? So people came to a
Yeah.
room somewhere
Yeah,
and
yeah. It
yeah.
was at the time when the crafting movement had restarted again, where
Yeah,
it was
that
like a
got me
two.
by, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so it was called the Make Lounge, and people could rock up for a 2 hour class, have a glass of wine, have some nibbles, make a lampshade or a cushion cover,
This in
or
London. Must
yeah,
have
it
been
was in Islington, just off of Upper
perfect.
Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, so lovely place. But I was living in Croydon, so by the time I'd gone from Croydon to Upper Street and paid for my travel and done this 2 hour class, and I didn't really make any money out of it,
Yeah.
but it was literally just to get my head out
Gave you the
of.
confidence to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was to get me into a space or a mindset or a headspace where I wasn't just thinking about the problems that I had in my day-to-day life and
Yeah.
business. I didn't really intend for it to be a business where I had no, I didn't say I had no intention of making money, but at that time, I didn't really think of it as this is going to be my business, because I still had the retail business and that was my business. This was my side gig. This was my little hobby, my side hustle that I didn't really think of. It wasn't sort of monetizing at the time. And I was literally just getting paid expenses. And through all of that, I decided that actually I didn't want to do another business that relied on staff. I didn't want anything heavy. And I just wanted to spend a bit of time at home for self-care and to kind of really delve back into my spirituality, my kind of meditation practice, because I was always into that kind of thing. And so I decided that maybe if I write a book, and I think actually it was probably because I'd been to some of your, I think it was like Brett McFall, Make Money While You Sleep.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, some
You
of
know,
those workshops.
so weird, right? This will make you laugh. I got a message yesterday from Alexis Garneau-Miller. Do you remember her?
Oh my God, that's a
She used to
blast from
run
the
a wellness
past.
centre in
Yes.
West London.
Yeah.
She was actually putting a picture on Facebook from a Brett McFall event in Australia yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Yeah, I remember
still
being in
going.
touch with her actually.
Yeah, she's in Australia. She's running, I think she's running she became a tradie. So she went from running a wellness centre in West London to
Yeah.
going out to Australia. And I think she's either a carpenter or a plumber, or she runs a
That's insane. And
female.
the name rang a bell and I'm like, why would I know her? And yeah,
She's
she
very
had a wellness
glamorous as well.
center because it was very in alignment with what I was doing. And like, so I decided to write a book. And I think one of the reasons why I decided to write the book was because I wanted just some time for myself
Yeah.
and I wanted to have an excuse to kind of sit at home and just have some time out really and do something creative. And because I was brought up in this environment of come on, you've got to take action and you've got to work, 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 and being in that sort of movement of doing stuff and thinking and doing stuff was what pushed you forward. I think it was Judith actually that said, actually, no, that is not where your aligned actions come from. It's actually creating that space and that stillness. And she gave me a contact for a guy called Tom Evans, who was a book coach.
I do
And I
remember.
went to,
Yeah.
yeah. So because I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. How do I write a book? I don't know. And so she said, oh, go find, do this workshop. So I went to one of Tom Evans' workshops thinking that he was going to teach me how to write a best-selling book. And then the first thing he did was pull out some oracle cards and take us through a guided channeling meditation.
Brilliant.
And I was like, oh, you can do it like this. This is
Okay.
amazing. And so by the end of 2010, I'd manifested a book deal. And so I got an email from a publisher at the end of it was November 2010. I got an email from a publisher saying, we have seen your workshops that you teach on the Make Lounge website. And we've had a look at your blog because I started a blog because
Okay.
I was like, okay, if I'm going to write, I need to, do the internet presence. And I was following all the instructions that I'd been given and all of the workshops that I'd been to at the Money Gym. And they said, oh, we've had a look at your blog and we've seen that you used to work for Neal's Yard. And we've got this
Instant
title.
credibility, Neal's Yard, isn't it?
Right, I know. We've got this title called A Green Guide to Natural Beauty. And we're looking for an author and we think that you'd be perfect. Would you write it for us?
That is so incredible.
I know. And then of course when I said to Judith, oh, I think I've manifested a book deal. And she said, well, of course you have. Of course you have. And I was like, but I don't really want to write a natural beauty book. But then I was like, okay, so because I wanted to teach perfume making workshops. And I was like, okay, so I've put it out to the universe that I want to write a book, but I wasn't really that specific. And I've got this opportunity. And I think this was a pivotal point in my business life. And the deal that they gave me was they gave me an advance and piddling royalties, but still they were going to pay me to write it. But the contract had to be signed like as soon as. So I think I signed the contract on Christmas Eve of 2010. And then they said their publishing date, in order for them to meet their publishing deadline, the book had to be the final finished book had to be sent to their editor because they were going to do all the photos, the editing, the whole nine yards. I literally had to create the recipes and write the copy. And that had to be done by the end of March 2011. So I had 3 months. And so I had a choice whether to step out, because I knew that I couldn't work in the retail business.
Not if you're going to got to do that in 3 months
And
flat.
do that in 3 months. And so at that point, I was working in the business, albeit every day except for 1 day a week. And I'm just like, what do I do? Because I can't turn this opportunity down, but I'm going to have to make a choice. And I was just like, I can't say no. And so I just said, look, to my partner at the time, I'm like, look, you are going to have to step up and take the reins. And he completely freaked out because I'd never really, I'd sort of, managed everything.
You hadn't trained him.
I hadn't trained him. Well, he was untrainable, to be fair. But I did have this Aussie guy, Doug.
Yes.
So I was like, okay. So I said to Doug, look, this is
your chance, mate.
What's going to happen. How about, and I knew that I couldn't manage my then partner, but I knew that he wasn't a good manager of people, but I knew that Doug was. And I said, okay, we need to just make this between ourselves, but let's have a conversation. I have a weekly meeting on the phone and you tell me what's going on in the shop. You manage the team, because the money was coming from the piercing studio, not necessarily from the shop floor. So as long as he could just like keep it going, and my ex was great on the shop floor. So as long as that was all going fine, the money was coming in through the studio. So I really needed Doug on board. And so I was like, this is what's going to happen. And I'm like, and he was like, yeah, cool. We can do this. We can do this. And it just worked so well. And it meant that I had someone on the ground who was like managing the team stealthily, who they all liked, who they all got on with.
He was just a natural leader then.
Yeah, naturally. And then I could crack on with my book and everything was hopefully
going to
be fine. And it was during that period where we actually turned a profit. And that was the most humbling thing of my life.
The fact that you turned a profit when you weren't there.
Yes.
God, that's a lesson.
That was the biggest lesson. And because I'd let go of the reins and I was actually doing something that I really enjoyed, writing this book, rediscovered my love of writing. I also had time and brain space to myself. I had the freedom that I really wanted. We start a business because we want to be free. And then we create this ball and chain of a job for ourselves if we're not careful, which is one of the things.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The advances, royalties are notoriously terrible when it's a traditional publisher, and advances are pretty terrible. Did the advance cover your 3 months like money from the shop, or did it cover a year, or what kind of?
I mean, it was about £5,000. So it was not very much. I would have done it for free.
Oh,
because I just wanted the opportunity to write the book. And for me, like that £5,000 was like, oh wow, they're actually going to pay me to do this.
That's a real bonus. Yeah.
That's a bonus. Yeah, it was not for that, because actually I was like, I am not really that interested in writing a natural beauty book. I want to write a perfume book. But in my head, it was
a step along the way.
It was like, if I say yes to this, I'm saying yes to the universe. I'm saying yes to the I've manifested. I'm not saying actually, well, I don't want that. I'm saying yes, but also it was a decent publisher. It was Ryland Peters and Small. It was an imprint. It was Seco Books, which was an imprint of Ryland Peters and Small, which were great publisher. And I'm like, okay, maybe further down the line, I can pitch them a perfume book.
Yeah.
And they'll publish it, which
so
they did.
One book deal. They weren't trying to.
Yeah, no, it was a one book deal. It was written to a brief. They were like, okay, this is what we want it to be. We want this many recipes. We want it to be like a cookery book for skincare. It's got to be all natural. And you give us an outline. You're the expert. You give us an outline, and we'll go back and forth and what have you. And my only caveat in that was that I wanted to have some perfume recipes in there as well. I wanted to do a perfume oil recipe and something else that could then segue me into the fragrance thing. And also, by the time I'd written it, they were like, okay, well, we're looking for someone to do a foreword for the book. And by the time I'd finished writing it, I was already starting to think about doing perfume classes. And actually, it was, I think I did in, I think 2010, I'd already started to teach perfume making classes, but I didn't have an audience. I didn't have anyone who knew who I was. But just by chance, coincidentally, I'd bumped into one of my old Neal's Yard colleagues in Sainsbury's at Clapham Junction, as you do. And I said, "Oh, I'm teaching perfume workshops." And she was like, "Oh, really? Neal's Yard are looking to do a natural perfume workshop.
Ooh.
Maybe you'd like have a conversation with Susan. You know, it's one of my old colleagues." And so I had a conversation with Susan and she said, "Well, yeah, do you want to write a workshop for us? We'll pay you to write the workshop if you can deliver it." And then so that was that. So that my first perfume workshop was actually for Neal's Yard.
That's
And
brilliant.
then I was still in touch with Romy Fraser, who was the founder, who'd since sold the company and had her own. She'd bought a farm, organic farm down in Dorset, and she was doing workshops in a variety of things like foraging, baking. And I said to her, "Look, this is what I'm doing now. Do you want me to come and do something for you at Trill?" And she said, "Yes, please." So I'd kind of like reached back out to those colleagues. And so that's where I was like, okay, I need to have some accountability to do these perfume classes. And so my first class I wrote for Neal's Yard, and that formed the basis of my first perfume making class. And then the second one I did, which was more of a 3 day, I think it was 2 or 3 day class, a bit more stretched out, was for Romy. And so it was my kind of practice runs with, and they got me the audience. I didn't have to rustle up an audience. And so between,
Presumably she kept, when she sold Neal's Yard, she still kept some of the database.
yeah, I think so. And moreover, more than that, I actually said, "Oh, I wonder if Romy would do the foreword for my natural beauty book." And so I said to the publisher, "Well, I could ask her if you want." And they were like, "Oh my God, that would be such a coup."
It's incredibility.
And then
Absolutely.
Romy said, "Yeah, of course I will. Yeah, of course." And so she did the foreword for the natural beauty book. And I mean, that's still in print now. That came out in 2011 and that still sells really well. It's probably been in its, I don't even know how many
Printed.
covers or iterations or variations. It's been translated into different languages.
And do you
It's
still get
still,
any royalties from it?
yeah, I mean, I still get minuscule royalties from it. But then I pitched the perfume book and they said no. And then because it was too soon, and then they came back to me, I think it was 2013, and said, or the end of 2012, I think, they said, I'd sent them a manuscript and an outline and what have you. And they were like, "Oh, no, not at the moment, but maybe, in a couple of years or whatever." And then they came back to me at the end, I think it was the end of 2012, or it might have been the beginning of 2013. And they were like, "Okay, if you want that perfume book, we can do it. But here's the deal." And the advance was the same. The royalties were 50% lower than what they were before. So they
Yeah,
were really low before. So it was terrible. So I'm like, okay, I'm barely getting anything for this, but they knew that I really wanted to do it.
yeah.
But they said, "But we've only got a window of this much time, so you've got to do it in 3 months." So I had another, like
Again,
they said, "No, no, 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 no," and then yes, but 3 months. So yeah.
and same advance, but so had did anyone know about self-publishing in those days? I can't remember.
No, not
No, I
really.
don't think you
No.
did.
I mean, maybe they did, but
Well,
it wasn't,
they weren't going to tell
I
you, were
wasn't
they?
aware of it.
No, they weren't. They weren't going to tell you. I mean, I published the Money Gym through Debs and Joe at Lean Marketing as it
Mm.
became, and then I think I did a self-published one. Then I went back to them for another one, and then to redo the Money Gym, or it might have been a different title. But then I've self-published everything ever since.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I didn't know when I pitched the perfume book to them, I wasn't really aware of self-publishing.
No,
I think I kind of was because I think Tom I would have talked
yes,
about
he
it,
would
but
have
I
known about it, wouldn't
yeah,
he?
but I think what it was at the time is that, and I think this was probably the reason why I went with it rather than self-publishing, was because, it was like, okay, what is the purpose of this book? Is it for money or is it for credibility?
Credibility.
And I think I got the credibility from the beauty book because that was, traditionally published, but it was almost like I wanted credibility in the perfume niche because even though there was crossover, I felt at the time it was quite different.
Yeah.
because the perfume industry was a very different industry from the natural beauty Neal's Yardy kind of industry. So I kind of wanted to have a traditionally published kind of calling card kudos type of a book.
It definitely does that. It opens doors,
Yeah.
sure. And it does definitely give you credibility having, especially being published through a good publisher like that.
Yeah, and also they would furnish Amazon. It was distributed through Macmillan Publishing,
Yeah.
and so it was all very legit and what have you. And but I have to say that now, if I was coming into this now, would I do the same thing? Possibly I would if I was just starting out. But writing another book now, I would definitely not go with a traditional publisher. I would definitely self-publish because those two kudos books, if you like, they've kind of done their job
Yeah.
and they've helped me create a really solid foundation and credibility for my business and what I do, that it's almost like I don't feel like I need a traditional publisher now.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm
And I
sure
think we've come a long way.
people don't realize how incredibly tiny the royalties are.
I literally make no money from my perfume book.
Yeah.
I make no royalties from it
Yeah.
because the advance has not even been paid out.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. You have to recoup any advance. It's the same as the music industry, isn't it? The bands have to recoup the advance
Yeah.
before they get
And
paid.
I think I make, I mean, I still, my beauty book, I think I still only make about 50p a copy
Yeah. Have
and
you,
about
just out of
25p.
interest, when do the deals expire?
Well, no, I'm out of contract. So I'm out of contract um with both of them, but they own the I own the copy of both books, but they own the photography and the layout.
Oh, okay.
So if I was to read, and the beauty book still is, they're still printing that. The perfume book is out of print officially, but I ended up buying a print run myself. So I've got mountains of those books
Oh, okay.
to sell through, but I don't know. Like when I've got rid of those, I'm gonna then try and renegotiate. I'm gonna try and renegotiate getting the graphic, the photography back, because
Yeah.
or photography from them, because if you then have to pay to reshoot an entire book that is very photography heavy
Yeah.
and the layout, I kind of tossed up whether it was cheaper to do that or buy a print run, and it actually worked out, I don't know, cheaper to buy the print run because I would still
Definitely
have,
cheaper in terms of your time.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, so that's why I haven't gone
Yeah. Okay.
any further with those books. But they're still on Amazon. I'm still
Yeah.
selling both of those books really well.
So you're now doing workshops. You're down in Devon doing work.
No, so I left Croydon in 2016 and moved to the New Forest. So I'm in the New Forest, just south of Salisbury. And when I moved out of London, so I still had Time Bomb, but me and my ex split up in 2015. And so he still carried on working in the business. I was still the sole director, shareholder, whatever. But I had at that point had been out of the business for so long that I wasn't really running the day to day. I was literally, making sure the staff got paid, the ordering was done properly, like the regulations were being, adhered to, like all of
Yeah.
the sort of grown up
Yes.
back of house stuff. And he was doing the front of house stuff for a long time. So actually me moving didn't make any difference. But when you are running a business as a couple, it is one thing. But when you are no longer a couple, it becomes more and more difficult. And it was actually quite hard to run the business with him anyway, even when we were together. And it just became more and more impossible
Yeah.
over the time that we were apart. And especially not being in London anymore and not being able to drop in unannounced and check up on things. And so I exited that business in 2018. The business is still running.
Wow.
Um, he's turned it into just a tattoo and body piercing studio. Ditched the clothing side. I was trying to figure out a way of exiting the business, knowing that I was basically paying his wages and he couldn't afford to buy me out.
Yeah. Did you have any of your money back by then?
Debatable, not
Yeah.
really particularly. We paid off all of the debt,
Well, that's
actually.
good.
So the business had paid off all of the debt. So I was debt free. And that was quite a funny thing, actually. I do think about this sometimes. Well, the business had basically paid back all. That's a goal, to have that kind of legacy, I think.
Yeah, it
And I
is.
think that is the beauty of today's world with digital, with online, with podcasts, actually, because, you know, we can immortalize, we can immortalize people, can't we,
Yeah.
in that?
That's awesome. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It was so lovely to connect with you again after all these years. Thank you
Yes.
for inviting me.
Stay happy, keep gardening. See you later.
Bye
Bye.
for now.